Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. China has been aggressively signing trade and economic agreements across the Indo-Pacific, Latin America, and in Africa, as we all know. The result is that these countries and these regions are growing more dependent on Chinese technology companies and supply chains, opening the door for China's authoritarian digital practices to take root in putting U.S. technology companies at a significant competitive disadvantage. And this all serves China's broader strategic interests. Furthermore, China's lack of transparency and disregard for human rights has led to a growing concern among many nations. I recently traveled to Cambodia and Singapore to discuss trade issues, and the resounding message that we heard was the Biden administration continues to leave a void that China is more than eager to fill. And as a nation, we must reclaim our leadership on the global stage and hold China accountable when it comes to its trade and global influence. Trade enforcement must be targeted to cut off unfair trade while facilitating swift movement of fairly traded products. Small businesses facing historically high inflation and a protracted supply chain crisis cannot afford all of this unnecessary red tape. The United States must hold China accountable for its human rights abuses and predatory trade practices that devastate American jobs. And I'm glad to join my colleagues on this committee and work to improve our supply chain and advance a trade agenda that protects American workers. Mr. Turkle, you had mentioned in one of your answers just recently, you were talking about how the U.S. needs to stop fighting against itself. Can you expand on that?
You mean the can you repeat that question again?
You had mentioned earlier in one of your last answers that the U.S. needs to stop fighting itself.
Yeah, I mentioned that for two reasons. One, the American consumers continue to purchase those tainted products that have been shipped out of China to the global supply chain. And then two, American investors, pension funds, are fueling this genocide and contributing to the Chinese political economy. And finally, the Chinese tech, it's going both ways actually, has been so effective, and the Chinese developed, tested, utilized, and now exporting all around the world. And some of our Silicon Valley companies that are silent on this issue has been helping the Chinese high-tech. That's what I meant when I said we need to stop.
I'd also argue that the U.S. government is doing the same thing. Last year, I had introduced an amendment when I was on the Transportation Committee, and the amendment would prevent the U.S. from importing materials that were mined with forced labor or child labor. I couldn't get a single Democrat to support that amendment. Do you believe that that's happening today? Are we importing minerals that have been mined by child or forced labor?
It's highly likely. I'm not a solar panel expert, but I've consulted with people who knows the industry. For example, the type of dirty work using coal to make solar panel, specifically Uyghur youth being subject to, is something that the Chinese population, the majority Han population, will not be involved in and engaging in. So based on that, and also the internal migration that has been in practice for years, even while I was living in China in the 1990s, points to the direction that the Uyghur youth have also been subject to forced labor practices.
Thank you very much for that answer. Mr. Romano, your company is using its supply chain and it's trying to create a rare earth mineral plant in Mississippi. Recently, the Biden administration signed critical mineral agreements with Japan and are currently negotiating with the EU. These agreements lack safeguards on where they source their critical minerals and make us again more reliant on China. Can you tell me a little bit about what Tronex is doing to build up the rare earth domestic industry, and what policies can the U.S. purpose to ensure that critical minerals are produced here at home?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So as I mentioned earlier, we have for many years been mining rare earth materials in the form of monazite and been processing that up until recently and been selling it to China. So that's where the market is. We talk about how does China get to the point where it is today. It's because they control the market. They have more than 90% of the production capacity. So what we're looking at doing now is building a facility in Hamilton, Mississippi, where we would take the products that we would have historically shipped to China and bring them into the U.S. and upgrade those into products that can be used in the magnets that I referred to earlier. I think there's got to be some sort of, 301 is another good example of how we've managed our core business, which is TiO2, but making sure that China can't do what they've historically done, and that is drop the price very quickly where it makes it uneconomical for people like us to look at investigating, expanding what would be a natural transition from us from mining those products and selling them to mining them and upgrading them and selling them into the U.S. We're looking at getting some funding from the U.S., so we're making good progress in that area, but I think USTR 301 trade tariffs have had a huge impact on our business. Those kinds of things will help us make sure China doesn't do that to us in this particular space around minerals, around rare earths.
Excellent. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Feimster is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Smith.